to import gasoline, diesel, and other refined products. And should the North Korean regime conduct another nuclear or ballistic missile test, this resolution commits the Security Council to take even further action. It sends the unambiguous message to Pyongyang that further defiance will invite further punishment and isolation.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Господин председатель, вновь выражаем неприятие той методологии согласования резолюции СБ, которая имела место при работе над американским проектом по КНДР. В стенах ООН и Совета Безопасности идут многочасовые дискуссии, написаны сотни документов о необходимости разработки реалистичных, выполнимых решений, учитывающих позиции сторон и взаимные озабоченности. Когда же дело доходит до конкретных страновых ситуаций, об этих стандартах забывают. В результате согласование осуществляется в режиме искусственных цейтнотов, а формулировки меняются за минуту до голосования. К сожалению, наш призыв к вовлеченным сторонам не допустить дальнейшей эскалации напряженности, пересмотреть политику обоюдного давления и запугивания не был услышан. Мы предлагали разумную и реалистичную альтернативу ультимативной логике санкций. Она заключается в том, чтобы начать выполнять не только санкционные разделы упомянутых решений СБ, но и те их положения, которые призывают к мирному, политико-дипломатическому урегулированию ситуации через диалог и переговоры, а также такие положения содержатся во всех, без исключения, резолюциях СБ по КНДР. Их игнорирование означает нарушение достигавшихся в Совете консенсусных договоренностей. Единство, конечно, важно, но единство не только в пользу санкций, но и в поддержку политического урегулирования.
The UN Security Council unanimously imposed new set of sanctions on North Korea following its latest ballistic missile launch. Resolution 2397 comes 24 days after Pyongyang launched its Hwasong-15 ICBM in late November. It's the fourth UN resolution on Pyongyang this year and the 10th in the UN's history.
9 times before today, we have asked the North Korean regime to choose the path of peace. But Pyongyang has chosen the path of isolation. As we have in the past, we will continue to match the Kim regime's choice of aggressive actions with actions of international sanction.
The US-led resolution aims to ban nearly 90% of refined petroleum product exports to North Korea by capping them at 500,000 barrels a year. That builds on the previous resolution in September that set a limit of 2 million barrels. Crude oil exports to the regime have also been capped at 4 million barrels a year. The list of banned North Korean exports was extended to include food products, machinery, and electrical equipment, as well as certain stones and minerals. Also, all North Korean nationals working overseas will have to be repatriated within 24 months. And 16 individuals were added to the international blacklist, freezing their financial assets and banning them from travel.
Today, we have banned the import of nearly 90% of refined petroleum products to North Korea. These products are used by the regime to resource their illegal nuclear and ballistic missile programs. By cutting off this supply, we will restrict their ability to develop and deploy these weapons.
The new sanctions resolution is expected to have an even greater impact on the reclusive regime's already struggling economy by further restricting oil supply and curtailing the regime's remittance earnings from workers abroad.
Yes, I think that would be a correct assumption to make. This round of sanctions is considerably more restrictive, and like previous rounds of sanctions, it does target the import and exports of the DPRK. So let's start with imports first. Now, this resolution effectively caps the import of refined petroleum products to the DPRK and to the DPRK at 500,000 barrels a year. Now, that volume is a fraction of the amount that the previous resolution had imposed on the DPRK. Back in September, after the DPRK had conducted that hydrogen bomb test, the Security Council imposed a cap of 2 million barrels a year, and now it is 500,000 barrels. So it is a considerable cut. Now, as for crude oil imports, that the Security Council resolution has capped that at 4 million barrels. Now, this doesn't actually reduce the volume. What it does is it maintains it at current levels based on estimations for this year. So keeping that level at 4 million barrels a year for the next year, and then possibly the year after that as well. Now, let's talk about exports. Up until this point, the Security Council sanctions have imposed bans on the export from the DPRK of items including seafood, textiles, iron, and coal. But now this resolution expands it to cover other areas, other products, including agricultural products, food products, machines used in the minerals industry, as well as electrical equipment. So it does, the point is to choke or disable the ability of the DPRK to divert resources to its missile and nuclear program, or to generate revenue from exports that it can then divert to its nuclear and missile programs. Now, this is U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, speaking to the Council after the vote. Have a listen.
The Kim regime continues to defy the resolutions of this Council, the norms of civilized behavior, and the patience of the international community. And should the North Korean regime conduct another nuclear or ballistic missile test, this resolution commits the Security Council to take even further action. It sends the unambiguous message to Pyongyang that further defiance will invite further punishment and isolation.
Well, it's really significant, and it's also ironic how the UN, as soon as their organization is threatened in any way by Pyongyang, like we're seeing here, they flip the script very quickly, but that's neither here nor there. This is very significant. The reason why is because North Korea is attempting, and in fact getting closer to being able to launch a ballistic missile, which can in fact hit our country. That's a very real thing. And so the president, along with his National Security Council, laid out a security plan that does what you have to do with terrorists. And why do I call this guy a terrorist? Because a terrorist will fire at civilians unprovoked. That's what they do. Yeah. So how do you deal with them? You got to go for the neck. You got to bite down, and you got to make sure that they can't move and that they can't get access to their funding. And so the attack of the finances, and by restricting funding to North Korea through very hard sanctions, is exactly the security play that's required. So salute to Donald Trump, and I salute the woman who's at the UN making that announcement also. I think she's fabulous, and I think she's no nonsense. And I love hearing her put it to the UN. It's absolutely my favorite thing I've been listening to in the last couple of days.
You know, not quite as far as President Trump wanted to go. He wanted to cut off all oil imports. This very dramatically limits them far below where they are right now, where they only had been reduced by about 30%. At this point now, they're almost gone. But he also wanted to have all foreign workers sent back to North Korea from everywhere else that they're working, which generates so much cash for the nation.
That's right. That's right. And by essentially what he's doing is he's creating choke points to the labor. And what that does is it essentially puts everybody on watch, which is, look, if you're going to export something to North Korea, if you're going to export goods there, if you're going to work and bring any kind of expertise back there, whether, you know, as well as the oil, we're going to constrict, even though it's only 30%, like you mentioned, still billion or millions of barrels per day. And so, again, you deal with terrorism. Again, I'm coming from the Israeli perspective here. My unit never went after the low-level terrorists. We went after the management of the guys, the financiers, the money guys. No money, no terror. No millions of barrels exported here. No labor being able to carry out North Korea business. Again, by constricting or putting choke points, you are softening that terrorist.
I don't want to run out of time. Trump. I'm glad you brought up terrorism, because that is your expertise, and I want to run out of time without asking you about this plot that was uncovered in San Francisco. It was stopped in time. You know, the assailant was posting things on the internet pro-ISIS, but also, you know, was a a shooting specialist. He had a lot of training and a very specific plan. How dangerous was this?
Well, he's a former Marine. Marines are dangerous. Marines are trained to kill people for a living. That's why we go to war with them. We train alongside the Marine Corps at our counterterrorist school in Expert, at our counterterror warfare school in Israel. They're extremely lethal, and that's what they're trained to be. They're just like Defense Secretary Mattis. You know, he has a plan when he walks in a room to kill everybody, and that's how well Marines are trained. And you want them in war. They're fine instruments of counterterrorism and urban operations. But in this case, you had a radicalized, again, online, an inbred or an inbreed terrorist that was created here through indoctrination. I don't know exactly what it was, but extremely dangerous guy. Hats off to the FBI for getting the jump on this guy and being able to put him down and getting those warrants in time. We just want to make sure now that our soft target defensive security measures are in place. And I think going into the new year, coming out of this holiday, I wouldn't be surprised if the president is looking at putting together some type of soft target security apparatus to be able to look at this thing.
Are the third major imposition of new sanctions during 2017, and it highlights the growing international pressure against the DPRK that shows no evidence of letting up. With each test, you see the different states prepared to take additional measures. None of this ends the nuclear weapons or missile program, but it imposes very, very real costs, and those are beginning to bite.
Jonathan, we've seen sanctions put in place against the DPRK for some time. You mentioned the third. Will they have the desired impact? Because I've heard the complaint that, yes, this hurts people in the DPRK, but it doesn't necessarily hurt the people at the top.
Actually, I think it probably does hurt the people at the top, because a lot of this has to do with transactions that relate to the ability to garner export earnings of one kind or another. We don't really understand all of the finances of North Korea, but my own view would be, to the degree that you constrict the amount of money flowing in and that you equally limit what North Korea can export in a way that inhibits their nuclear weapon, their ability to earn foreign exchange, you're going to impose costs. It may have some effects on the broader North Korean population, but my own view is that it will have a growing effect on the elites that support the Kim regime, not simply to have an overall effect on the economy as a whole. I might add that the initial estimates suggest that in 2017, the economy of North Korea will again shrink. It did much better in 2016. In 2017, the costs are really beginning to mount, which over time I think will really impose on the North the need to make fundamental decisions about what it does.
Well, let's talk about that, because I spoke to one expert earlier today who said, and he's not the first one to say this to me, that there's no turning back. The genie is out of the bottle. He doesn't believe the DPRK will abandon its nuclear programs. They've shown no signs of doing that. Do you agree? And if that is the case, what comes next? Because all the dialogue, the U.S. keeps saying, they're insisting they have to abandon the nuclear program for there to be some sort of dialogue.
Well, I think we are involved in a very long-term process. I do not see any near-term possibility that North Korea is simply going to cease, let alone roll back its nuclear weapons and missile programs. But it's the idea that over a longer period of time, the ability to contain what North Korea undertakes as part of a larger process and a larger strategy, as long as all the members of the international community share that kind of commitment, that there would be, there may be momentary leakage in one area or another, but I think that this is really changing not only multilaterally, but it's also changing on the part of individual states, including, I might add, China, which is being very clear about things that in the past it was prepared to tolerate. It is no longer prepared to tolerate various transactions. So I'm not expecting immediate results. This is going to be a very, very long-term process, but it's a very, very clear signal of a unanimous opposition to North Korea's moves that I think will, over a longer period of time, really begin to have some effects.
And you talked about the economy in 2016, the economy in 2017. Let's talk a little bit about the rhetoric in 2017, very heated on both sides from Pyongyang and Washington. It appears that U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson was trying to provide some sort of off-ramp recently when he said both sides can get together, they can even talk about the weather. What do you see happening as we move into 2018? Is it going to be more of the same, or do you see a breakthrough? And how does China factor into all of this?
Well, the noises coming out of the United States government are really, frankly, very, very mixed. There's not a lot of message consistency emanating from Washington on these issues. There are rumors and rumblings of consideration of more forceful options, which, in my own view, I think would be an absolute disaster for the region as a whole, and that the avoidance of war needs to be foremost on the policy agenda. But that said, the idea here is that China is critical to this process. If China does not cooperate fully and unequivocally with various measures, then it creates running room for North Korea that would enable it over a longer period of time to sustain and enhance its weapons programs. So this is, in my view, it's not a near-term crisis. It's something that will unfold over a much longer period of time. And I am, however, concerned that some of the voices that are being expressed, that there is immediacy and urgency to this, that there's no more time. I don't accept that proposition. It is going to take consistency and coherence over a longer period of time, but that doesn't mean that we have to be pressured into taking very, very extreme steps in the near term.